Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Digital Diary, Adventures of a Computerized Quilter. Today's topic is really fun, kind of exciting. I'm really excited for this one. We are going to be talking about combining computerized quilting with free motion. So we know that not every computerized quilter does or loves free motion quilting, but we have some show and tell today and a lot of talk too about why we think it's awesome to combine the free motion quilting with the computerized quilting and why it can be the best of both. And I think we're just going to jump in and get started with some pictures. So I think we've got Gina up first. Let me share my screen. All right, we'll start off with Gina Kubik. And Gina, what do you want to tell us about this quilt? Tell us where you used the free motion and give us a little info here.
This quilt I did when I was just starting to use free motion, and I was a little nervous about it. So what I did was I embedded a bunch of different Statler blocks into the background. I knew I needed to do some free motion in this quilt. Then I started free motioning around them just to kind of give it not all of my free motion look, but just to learn how to blend my work with the Statler's work. And it kind of helped me get started because I felt like it wouldn't be totally my art creation. And so that's something that helped me get started with free motion. And as you look at it, you can kind of see the different Statler patterns that are back there, and they draw your eye. So I felt like this was a way I could get started and not be too shy about it with my free motion.
Yeah, I love that because that's really good tip. There are a lot of computerized quilters that didn't have or haven't gotten a hand-guided background because they started with a computerized machine. And maybe they're a little nervous too to get started in free motion. And this is a great way to kind of take one little step into it, but not feel like you're completely dependent upon your free motion skills while you're still developing those skills and those talents. That's really cool. I like that, Gina. What about this one?
Now, this is a quilt one of my customers who I love very much. She does quilts with unusual, well, not unusual, but extremely beautiful, beautiful fabrics, but not conventional quilting fabrics by any means. A lot of satin and lace and silk. And as you can see, I do have a lot of computerized work in there, but with all the things that she put on top, and of course I do ask them not to add different things on top, but sometimes it's hard if they have already added them, like the little lacy doily looking things. You really do have to do some hand drawing in there with your machine just to get around the obstacles. These quilts that this customer brings are just gorgeous, but every one I get is a new challenge. And at first I'm like, oh my gosh, with the lace and everything, but I have learned more from these quilts than any of the quilts.
We learn from those challenges. I say bring them on. I love this quilt.
Yeah. And I love that attitude because we can look at it as troublesome or we can look at it as something that's going to help us grow and develop as a quilter.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But to jump back to your discussion about those obstacles, this quilt behind me, this is my example of the obstacles. The only thing on this quilt are these yo-yos. That's the only obstacle. And I'm like you, I tell my customers, please leave those until after I've quilted the quilt. Yes. But they don't always do that.
Right.
So this little quilt came in with, it was just ready for an edge to edge, just to quilt the whole thing fast and easy, except for this row of yo-yos along there at the top of my screen. So my fix for that was to set up two edge to edges. Actually, I did this one on the Elevate. So I did an edge to edge that came down almost to where the yo-yos were. And then I did an edge to edge that was underneath it. And then I filled in a strip here free motion using the same swirl pattern that was the computerized design. So that was my workaround to get around those yo-yos.
Yeah, that works great. That's a great idea.
Yep. All right, well, let's see what's next. Tell us about this one.
This is another quilt where I combine computerized quilting with hand driving. This customer had this beautiful, beautiful embroidery work in some of her borders. And yet some of the borders I felt were okay to use computerized. The light color embroidery work, I was able to use a little bit thinner thread, 100-weight thread, and quilt right over them with the curved crosshatch border. But then with the heavier embroidery work, I used hand driving around there. And
So is that entire border hand guided, or did you combine within the border?
I actually did the entire border on this one. I started getting braver and started doing more and more chunks of things. And after I started developing a few skills, and then the middle of the quilt, it's hard to see from here, but I did radiating lines, and then that was computerized quilting. And so I really did almost every other section here. One was computer and one was hand guiding.
They balance well.
Oh, thank you. A lot of fun. Here is another one. I started as I was developing a little more hand-guided skills and a little more bravery with hand guiding, doing a little different things. And so the flower pot in the center, I decided I just wanted to accent the drapiness of the flowers that were draping down. And so I drew them starting in the middle, coming on out. And then, of course, in other areas like the outer border, I used the computer. In all the other blocks there, I actually went for it and hand guided all of the rest of the blocks except for the border in this one.
I love how one block spills into the next,
Mm-hmm.
how your designs don't stop right where that seam line is.
I think that helps accentuate the important elements on the quilt, those appliques, because you don't have hard seam lines.
This again is the same customer, and she liked how the other one was done, so I mimicked it a little bit. I used the curved cross hatching in some of the border areas and hand driving in some of the others. And I had fun. I decided to do the radiating lines around the middle block. And so I filled inside part of that middle block with the fill feature. And then I put point-to-point triangles around the square, the edges of the square. But you can see that I filled by hand in between whatever wasn't covered by both of those techniques. So I did really combine quite a bit.
It looks like you have kind of an echoing effect around that wreath in the center, the leaf wreath.
Uh-huh.
And that's really fun to do, I think, free motion, because you can just follow along and it can be a little organic. It doesn't have to be perfect. Whereas if you were using your computerized machine, your Statler, to click around to stitch in the ditch around that whole wreath, it's definitely possible. And we've probably all done that kind of a thing, but it takes a very, very long time to click it out and then stitch it out and make sure and hope it's accurate, because shrinkage has moved things. Whereas with the hand driving, it's really pretty fast and easy, right?
Right. And once you get braver with the hand driving, you realize that you can use your machine to its best benefit. You can use the computer when it's the best, and you can hand drive when it's the best. And so you learn a balance of the techniques, and it makes it so much easier for your quilting.
Nice. Well, thanks, Gina.
Oh, you're
Those are
welcome.
cool quilts. It sounds like you've got some customers that help you grow and develop as a quilter.
I love them.
All right, we're going to jump over to Paige and have her talk about a couple of the pictures she sent in.
Yeah, this was, well, first to start, Gina was saying how she was a computer quilter and then she got brave and started hand guiding. I was hand guiding for 6 years before I put my computer on. So it wasn't a question of being brave, but trying to switch my brain back. And this was a quilt that was a raffle quilt for the Minnesota Quilters. And what I did do, computer, was the parallel lines that help give me new sections. So then I could section things off. And then everything else is hand guided. And so I had different sections of different background fills.
All right, let's see your next one here.
Okay, this is something that I will do frequently, is put a design on the border. I echo it, and then I freehand my piano keys. And I do that using a little piece of grid to get my distance. So they're not exact, and that kind of makes it a little more organic. The background fill that I have here is my version of, it's McPaging is what it is. I have various fills that I can do over and over and over again because they're my to-go-to. I practice them. And so if I'm doing something with a lot of curls, this is something that I go to automatically. And I got the idea off a Bounty paper towel because they curl into one another.
Oh.
Oh my gosh, I get inspiration everywhere too for design ideas.
Yeah,
Great.
but that outside border is a border that I echoed and I made it smaller. So I had room for a background. Otherwise, if I didn't have a dense background behind that, that feather would not show up over the patterned fabric.
I agree, yeah.
Here again, I am using just a basic stipple behind things to take the background back, which allows the other areas to move up. So when I do this, I make my designs a little smaller so that I have area to go around.
It also looks to me, Paige, like you're doing a lot of echoing of all those designs. Is that to give you like closed edges so that you can
Yes.
fill?
And I don't know if I have another one in here, but if you back up, Karen, we'll see on that. So on that top one, there was curls where that pattern did not close. So the echo, you're absolutely right, Christine. The echo allows me an area that I can use as a full area. I don't have to get into those little sections. So the echo is very important.
And that's a technique we use too, even when we are using the computerized version of fill. So, to make those boundaries, essentially make them a little bit simpler shapes. So that's something we use even with computerized, but here you've done the free motion in the background with this one and with that next image. And most of us, if we've used our Statler for some time, if we're familiar with fill, we can see how we could create this look with a dense stipple design edge to edge put in there using fill. But it truly is so much faster to do a little bit of practicing, get good at even a basic background design like a stipple like this.
There is nothing wrong with a basic stipple. We've kind of gotten away from it because people think they want fancier. Sometimes it just needs to be a background. Okay, here is a perfect example of, I sat on this quilt for a long time because I was overwhelmed with all that white space. What am I going to do? So I started in the corners And I just started throwing in motifs. So why don't you move that? I want you to see that's like 108 by big. So I just started throwing in motifs, and there are 3 colors of thread on here. The big feathers are done with a very dark green, and then I went around, put all the big feathers in, then I came back and put in like the circles that combine, that bring your eye from one motif to another, and little hearts inside the big hearts, and those are done with a lighter green. And then I went back and freehanded after the fact with a still lighter green. There is no white thread on here. So this was done in a series of layers. I just kept adding things. I wanted to fill the space up because there was no way I could do background fill in that whole space.
Oh, I love this. This goes back to some of those examples Gina showed of placing those motifs and then doing the free motion to fill in the space.
Yep. And this is one of the things that I will do over and over again. I just take one little element, like my bugs, and throw them in there to fill a space, echo it, and then come back and freehand around it after the fact. But
so did you pull those bugs from like an edge-to-edge pattern or something, Paige?
Yes, I did. Divide is a wonderful thing. And by echoing it once again, I don't have to go around all those little legs on the ladybug.
What I like about this technique and what I want to point out about this block is even for our viewers that are Elevate owners, so maybe they don't have the Echo feature on their quilting machine, but they have a Creative Studio and they can pull those patterns apart just like Paige did, use Creative Studio, find a motif, create that motif, create an echo and make a pattern out of that they can then easily place on their quilt and then finish that background free motion, just like Paige did.
That's exactly what I did. I pulled all the bugs and I echoed them. So that was a pattern. I did not put the bug on and then echo it. I did all of that before I put the pattern into the project. So totally doable on an Elevate, totally.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to point out about this is, so these backgrounds on these applique blocks, I get these kind of things all the time and the customer wants custom, of course, because that's usually the best way to highlight the work that's been done on these applique quilts. But these that are like this or the Baltimore albums, they have a lot of irregular shaped appliques, right? And sometimes I feel like Statler owners specifically, computerized quilters, struggle for a long time trying to figure out how to make fill work in those backgrounds. And it can. And there are classes on, how to do that a little more simply. But truly, I mean, look at that irregular shape on that far left block that's only showing half. That would be so difficult to get the software to fill around that compared to just free motion quilting that background, whether it's the pearls or the stipple or straight lines or whatever it might be.
Yep. Freehand is faster.
Mm-hmm.
This is the quilt behind me. And so I do use free motion and patterns frequently. So the patterns that were done on my computer, actually I started with the outside border and you'll probably see that in another shot. And some of these I chopped that border up and made new ones. Yep. That's what I started with. And then I chopped it up to make the other leaves going in. If you back up to this one. Okay. So to fill the space between, I took some elements, and the ones that are computer are the circles, ones that are done in a line, the pearls, that's with apply, but those little spiral circles, that was taken out of an edge-to-edge pattern, and I just put them in whatever could fit in a space. So I went around and dropped all those so that they were evenly spaced, and then I went back and did my fill. Again, I'm using channel lock for my lines, pebbling, and then the channel lock again to break that space up.
And what I like about this picture is that it kind of shows us your process. Now you've talked us through it, and I do the same thing, so you can see that not all of the quilting is done in this picture if you look closely. And you do the same thing that I do. You save that most dense, the most intricate quilting for the last thing on the quilt.
It will distort more than anything, the tighter quilting. Also, this is pink thread. It's not white. Fear not the thread.
Okay, let's take a look at some pictures from Deanne Perego.
So this quilt, it was actually a group project. There were 5 different people that each did their version of this quilt, and I got to quilt several of them. So each of the bears had to be a little bit different. And so I was able to play around with that and try out different shapes and squiggles and lines and circles. And it was kind of fun because I did not come from any sort of artistic background. I really enjoy the computerized side. I can't draw, but I have learned to, and I've learned to have fun with it and not be afraid to try something new and different. You can see the leaves in the border. They're actually computerized. I simply cut and pasted and moved things around and fit them in there so that they would be more consistent than what I'm able to do. But it was just fun drawing and learning how to do that.
So Deanne, did you start with a computerized machine or did you start as a free motion quilter?
I started with a computerized.
And you've since learned, I think I've heard you say before, that you like to drop the belts and play with that free motion now.
I do. And it's so funny because in high school, I was one of those really good students, except for 2 classes. I had to get a tutor for geometry, and I got a D in art. And what am I doing now? Those are the 2 things I use every day. So, don't put yourself in a box.
Ooh, I love that. I agree with that mantra. There is no box. If there's a box, it's because we've created it in our head.
Yep.
I love the echoing on that bear. You can see his ear and you can see his knee. Great job.
Yeah.
This one was super fun to do because all of the boats on the right side, everything in that is digitized. I took apart patterns and put them together so all the clouds, everything are identical on each one of those boats. But then you go over to the panel side on the left, and that was all drop the belts and let's just play. And so I was able to, draw around things and put in fills, and all the applique was not sewn on. So I had to go around every single one of those. And then the very, one of the borders, not the very outside one, but the darker one, that, like Paige, I used channel locks and put in piano keys. Just free motion it.
I liked when you said earlier that panels are a good way to practice and play with your free motion if you're trying to develop your skills or if you're just ready for a break and want to do something fun.
Mm-hmm. It is. This customer brings me probably a dozen a year. Her mother is in her upper 90s and likes to embroider. And so she hand embroiders all of these, and they want it to look very old school. So just a stipple around everything is really handy. But you can see, though, I used the computerized quilting in the sashings and the borders. But I think just going right up to the embroidery and not going very much in, just enough to identify the different parts of the outfit or the hair, it just allows those things to pop out.
Good dimension. I like it.
This was a really interesting quilt because the customer painted each one of these pairs. And so it was, so I'm quilting over painted fabric, which is a little intimidating at first, but I just slowed it down and it worked really well. And it was, each one of these 4 blocks represented a different season. So they were slightly different in their coloring, but she wanted a different background on each one of them that coordinated with the fabric. And so I was able to do that, and it was fun. So I have some swirls and some waves and some leaves and some McTavishing, but the quilting on each one of the pairs is identical. It's I just took an edge to edge and used fill and put it in at approximately the same spot on every single one of them.
That it really gives dimension. That's a wonderful thing. I'm going to remember that one too. I love looking at other people's pictures.
Yes.
Excellent choice on those pairs.
Yeah, I love that pattern design choice as well. And I like how, because it's the same on each one, it creates that continuity on each of those pair blocks.
They really look three-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
No. All right, let's take a look at some of Christine Perego's work now.
Okay, so with this one, I think one of the main things that I consider when I mix my freehand and my computerized designs is I like to pick computerized patterns that are not as geometrically precise. I like some of those designs that are actually drawn freehand and then digitally mastered, right? So that you're not seeing, every little spot is at the exact right geometric point, because I think a lot of those designs match with free motion a whole lot better than if you see that geometrically precise quilting and then you try to marry some of the freehand stuff with it. And so in this case, I used those big sweeping patterns that are all very different and organic, and then filled in around them so that I got that sawtooth edge with freehand, free motion designs. So the big white spaces are big digital patterns, but then I came back and filled around them so that it looks like it fits into all of those little sawtooth edges.
Yeah, it's really cool because you can't tell where the design ends and where Christine starts.
Exactly.
Good job.
And again, I love that combination of the flowing organic designs and those straight linear designs.
Exactly. So this one, she wanted something that was reminiscent of broken dishes, because it's one of the patterns she was using. And so I created the digital designs that you see in the background that are all that geometric. But then we did some thread painting in the big center section. And then in order to fill around that gold thread, I just did kind of a freehand echoing so that it was very much more organic than the very precise geometric. So that in this case, I was intentionally playing that geometric versus organic feel specifically to create the look on this quilt.
So in these, that echoing, that's like a spiraled echo, right? A continuous echo, but with free motion, simple to do.
very, very fast. And the big thing, the reason why I did them freehand versus something that was computerized is I could maintain the same density. Because if I tried to put a spiral into the weird boundary shape, it would work, but in each of those different areas, I might get a different density of pattern. And so some of those are a lot smaller than some of the bigger ones. So I'd have to trim the pattern before I fit it to the boundary. And so I just opted to go for a freehand look on these.
It's a nice look.
Okay, so this is the dude. She brought me this quilt, and quite frankly, I wasn't quite sure what I was doing with it. But you can see that we have kind of a halo effect with those bowling pins around there. That was all with circular array. But in order to get kind of the hair and the face contours and the beard, I had to do all of the work free motion. One of the big things when I was moving, so I got really good at free motion on my domestic before I bought my long arm. And so in transitioning to freehand on the long arm, I actually ended up going and adding a ruler base to my Statler, which sounds a little bit odd, but I don't necessarily use it for ruler work. But it gives me an area of my quilt where I can put a hand down on the quilt and kind of, it provides a little bit of friction so that when I'm guiding that big machine around, I have a little bit more control. And for me, it was kind of like just a little bit of a crutch, right? I could control it a little bit better just by having that ruler base on there.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm glad you mentioned that because I wouldn't have thought about that because I did very, very little quilting on my domestic machine before I moved to long arming. But I'm sure we have viewers that are either making the transition or considering it or have made a transition from domestic machine quilting to long arming. And that's a big change because your brain has to think different ways. And so I love that idea, Christine. Thanks.
Yeah, it's kind of like a break. One thing I have done to establish that same sort of drag is to lower the take-up bar so that it is resting more on the machine itself. But you've got probably a little more control on the front end where
well,
you
that way I
need
can
it.
put different pressure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I never thought of it either.
Yeah.
Wow. Thanks everybody for showing those beautiful inspirational pictures and chatting about free motion quilting combined with computerized quilting. Hopefully some of our viewers are inspired to do more or start free motion quilting. And if you were inspired, remember that you can go to Gamel Education. There are already classes there on Gamel Education. Specifically, I know Jody Robinson and Sharon Blackmore have classes under the Elevate class that talk about combining computerized and free motion quilting. They would be great for anybody, Statler or Elevate or even free motion users. Or there are other classes on free motion quilting. And I was just reminded about consult with an educator. So you have the opportunity to pick one of the educators and have some one-on-one time and ask whatever questions you want, whether it's free motion or computerized. So don't forget about those opportunities on Gamel Education. Thank you again for sharing your pictures and for the inspiration. And thanks to our audience for joining us. And we'll catch you next time on Digital Diary. Bye.
Bye.